I've been asked a few times about how to paint Space Marine shoulder pad trim, so I'd like to show you my two approaches. The specific colours are not really important here, but I've got a few shoulder pads and a blank marine which I'm going to use to show you. There are two approaches that I take to shoulder pad trim. Approach A is base in the trim colour and then fill in the pad colour. So that's base in the colour that your trim is going to be and then fill the pad with the colour with your brush. And then approach B is to base your model in the colour of the main pad and then add the trim separately. So really, I mean, this is just about the order in which you paint the items and which one is going to be the base colour. Whichever ends up easier is going to depend on what colour you base or prime your model and what colour you want to do the trim with. First, I'll show you blue and gold for our lads, the Ultramarines. Also first, I get completely confused when I'm recording this and I end up putting blue trim on a gold pad, which is the sort of thing a moron would do, since we all know that the trim is gold and the pad is blue, so this should have been me filling the pad with blue. So let's skip past this absolute nonsense and come back to this approach, since you're already getting a few minutes of me being an idiot for free. Let's look at adding the gold trim. So this is option B. The base colour has been added already, in this case it's blue, and the trim colour gold is going to be added with the brush. So my approach is to get a good point on the brush, that's important, and I'm using my Hawk Miniatures size 3 in this case. And ultimately you carefully run that brush at an angle along the edge of the trim. Now, this requires good steady hands and a good bracing position, and I also rotate the shoulder pad to accommodate for my painting angle because I don't want to be painting upwards or away from my brush. Now, whether I add the main trim colour with the edge of the brush or whether I do the fine lip first is not really of any consequence, but this approach does have an advantage over approach A, which you will see when we get to doing yellow, or if you're working with any colours that don't have very good coverage. Anyway, at this point I realised I'd been an idiot and painted the other pad all gold again. So we can then look at option A, which is filling in the pad and leaving the trim colour, which would have been your base coat, so in this case gold. Now, this approach is easier for beginners in terms of brush control, but the disadvantage here is you're painting over a large flat panel, so if your paint has good coverage, great, otherwise you'll be looking at probably a number of coats or a different base coat before you get to that main colour. This also means you're more likely to need a sub-assembly, since in this example you'd have needed to base coat or prime the shoulder pad in gold, but generally we base Ultramarines in blue. So if you can base coat the shoulder pad separately, this might prove to be an easier approach. Again, all fun and games until you're doing yellow shoulder pads on black Space Marines. Anyway, let's do the same again, now that you've seen that, but with yellow, a la Imperial Fists. Option A, our base the pad red and fill the main area yellow, is first up, and again probably an easier approach since you're just pushing your brush up towards the edge gently and applying a little bit of pressure to make sure you get that straight line along the trim. I'll work slowly when I'm at the edge, and then I brush the rest of the colour towards the centre of the pad when I'm doing that. Approach B, being a little more difficult to master, is more about getting the brush control spot on to tackle that small lip with the tip or the end of your brush without pushing the colour onto that main pad area. This is tougher since you're doing more rotation of the model, you're needing to use a good bracing position and just be more careful in general, but my feeling is this is a better one for the final finish. Obviously I went back to option A and I added a second coat of yellow over the red, which helped, but if you're needing to do multiple coats in this way, you're having to be careful each time and repeatability might become a factor. How about green and gold, Dark Angel style? Let's look at both options. Option B first this time, a fine trim of gold. Using the tip and the edge of the brush, obviously it's difficult to get it neat, and you can see here actually I've managed to make an error where some of the gold has got onto the main pad. Now that wouldn't be an issue if you're on base coats and you can just tidy that up by going over it again with the same green, but I was trying to avoid that. Anyway, after that mess, I carried on, and again, it's just about getting that neat line and using the pull stroke with your brush and the natural bends of your fingers to make that work. For option A, where we'll use green over the gold, you're in a better position with this example since it's a reasonably dark green and it has pretty good covering power. Just 2 coats required here. I'll typically start in a corner with my brush tip angled into the corner just to get the point and work along the edge from there. I usually let my brush get close and then I apply a little pressure just to push those bristles towards the edge, as I mentioned before. In the last example, I'll use a Space Wolf's grey and a yellow. The yellow I'm brushing on isn't the same yellow as the base coat that I've used here, so don't worry too much about the actual colours. So starting with option A, if I fill the grey pad with yellow using the same technique as before, you can see how brutal it is doing the yellow over that grey. So if you want to check my painting yellow armour video, you'll see this would be a case of probably pink or white first on this pad particularly. Anyway, try to look beyond my coverage and just understand the technique that I'm using. Again, into the corners with the brush and then pulling along the edge and into the centre. If we look at using the grey over the yellow, we'll know it'll go on much better since the paint has good opacity, but you can see there's more patience required and it's about getting that brush control again with option B. If you were doing Space Wolves, you'd likely be doing yellow over the top of grey, but if you can keep the pads separate when you're basing everything and you can base them in yellow first, then this second approach is probably going to give you a better yellow base coat if it's been sprayed or if it's been done without needing to worry about those edges. So there you have it. All my shoulder pads in a row. Yes, the yellow coverage is shit, but hopefully that's sort of shown you how I go about painting shoulder pads trim on a Space Marine. Until next time, bye bye.